So thank you everyone who was able to join us today. My name is Christopher Ledvina. I'm the Assistant Director of Cooperative Partnerships at Lakeland University. This is the Employer's Playbook for Talent, a series of professional development sessions that Lakeland's cooperative education team puts together every semester. And part of our diversity and equity and inclusion sessions for this semester, we are going to be listening to some information about the laws behind DEI efforts, very important in professional settings right now. So a couple quick things as we get started today. The first one is if you would please, for the duration of the presentation that Jim will be providing, if you could have your camera off as well as your microphone muted, that would be fantastic, just so we can, make sure that we can focus on the presentation that Jim is going to be providing. After the presentation is done, we will have some time to ask questions and have a little conversation if you're interested. At that time, you are more than welcome to turn your cameras on, unmute, or if you have questions in the meantime, please put them into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we will go from there. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Lakeland's own Jim Jones to introduce himself and get us started.
Thanks very much, Chris. As Christopher mentioned, my name is Jim Jones. I am currently the Vice President for Human Resources at Lakeland. I am also a 30-plus year attorney. And so talking about the laws and the legal framework for DEI work comes a little bit naturally to me. I'm going to go ahead and pull up and share this. Please let me know if you can't see that. Chris, I'm going to assume that they can because it worked in the test run a minute ago.
I can see it, yes.
Okay, good. So what we're talking about today basically is the legal framework for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workforce, and in particular on the hiring side, the staffing function, right? Bringing in our workforce, and what can we do and what can we not do as HR professionals or as professionals in other fields to strengthen our workforce by making our workforce more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I come at this topic, like I said, from a legal background. I represented employers and employees in employment law cases for years and years before starting here full time at Lakeland. I've taught here for a number of years, but I started here in our HR department just a little more than a year ago. So I really do have a legal framework more than anything, but I think that's helpful for a topic like this. I was trying to figure out what the best way to address this was. How can we look at the legal framework for DEI work and know how does it break down, so to speak? And I really came up with two goals that I want to review with you and talk about today. The first one is we need to discuss and have a good idea of what not to do, international symbol for not, what not to do when it comes to discrimination in our workforce. That one is pretty easy for a lawyer, right? I mean, I'm used to telling clients and other people what not to do. That comes pretty naturally to me. Incidentally, I'm married to a lawyer, and I can tell you that it comes pretty naturally to her too. But the idea there is most of our laws are geared to telling us what not to do, okay? So that's the first goal. We need to know what we can't do, but that's not the hard part. The harder part is really the second goal. If we establish what we can't do, then we have to follow up with that and say, okay, then what can we do? What should we do as it relates to staffing to strengthen our workforce and make it more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable? And so I'm really coming at this from both angles, but we're going to take them one at a time. We're going to start with what can't we do? Well, the best way to start what you can't do is start at the legal framework, the legal requirement, and it should always start with this statute right here. This is an excerpt from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the most important federal anti-discrimination statute, okay? And it covers a wide variety of things. It covers housing, it covers public accommodations like restaurants and theaters and transportation. But for our purposes today, Title VII is the part we want to focus on because it covers discrimination in the workplace, right? Discrimination in employment. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 has been around for a while, obviously since 1964. The statute is actually 9 days older than I am. It covers my entire life. It became law in July of 1964. And here's basically the provision as it relates to employment. There are other provisions, of course. This is just an excerpt. I don't want to give you the wrong idea. This isn't the whole thing, but this is enough to get us going. You see what it says? It says it's an unlawful employment practice for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise discriminate against any individual with respect to compensation terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of such individuals' race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Those were the original 5 protected classes. I'm sure you know that we have added others now, things like pregnancy and age and disability. But those were the original 5: race, color, religion, sex, national origin. So I think we're done, right? I mean, it made it illegal to discriminate. Are we done? This federal statute should have covered everything, right? I think we all know better. It doesn't cover everything, and it certainly doesn't get us where we want to be, both as a society and as employers. But it's the starting point. It's the what you can't do, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII here, basically covers, it basically emphasizes what is an unlawful employment practice. In other words, what you can't do. And notice how it's written. It covers just about everything in employment. Hiring and firing, right? Refuse to hire or discharge, meaning fire, or any other aspect of employment, compensations, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment. So it's designed to cover the entire employment relationship. And like I said, the original 5 protected classes: race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. This is good. It's a great starting point. It tells us what we can't do based on federal law. State law, next statute, next slide. What not to do in Wisconsin is basically based on the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act. And some of you probably know the Fair Employment Act is essentially written like the national statute. Okay, it is written like the Civil Rights Act. It is basically telling you what you as an employer can't do. You notice what it says. It says subject to some exceptions. There are always exceptions. Then it says no employer may engage in any act of employment discrimination on the basis of, and then in Wisconsin we have 18 protected classes. We start with age, race, creed, etc., all the way to participating or declining to participate in a religious or political meeting. So we have 18 protected classes in Wisconsin. We've covered a broader group, but basically the law is still more or less the same. It's more or less still telling an employer what that employer may not do. No employer may engage in any act of employment discrimination. Now, again, this is pretty good. This is a great starting point. We have expanded on the federal law. We have added additional protections, but it's still the same idea. It's still telling an employer what that employer cannot do. Now, as a lawyer, I can tell you that's a great starting point. I want my clients, I want Lakeland here, my current employer, I want us to know what we can't do. But if all we think about is what we can't do, then we're really missing the boat. We're really missing the much bigger picture of what's going on here. What these basically have in common, if you look through the statutes, and you can read the specific language, but if you look through them, what it basically says is you can't discriminate. Let's just pause for a moment. Can we pause for just a second? Is that surprising to anybody? Did anybody not already know that? You don't have to answer out loud, and you don't even have to put it in the chart, in the chat. Most of us know already you can't discriminate. I mean, this isn't news. I hope it's not news, right? These statutes have been around a long time. I hope we already know that. Now, I will tell you, I've had plenty of clients who didn't know everything in the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, right? There are plenty of employers out there who aren't really sure about the part about arrest and conviction record, or aren't really sure about the part about marital status. There are some details that sometimes escape people, but really, we already know you can't discriminate. I mean, this shouldn't be news. Maybe it is to some, but it shouldn't be. We all know that. The question facing HR departments and employers nowadays isn't so much what can't we do. We mostly know that. The question really is, okay, if we know what we can't do, what can we do? What should we do to make our workforce stronger by making it more diverse, equitable, and inclusive? And what I want to spend our time on today is not so much the negative telling you what you can't do, it's more the positive, what should we be doing? What can we do to improve our workforce by making it more diverse? And let me pause again there, because I want you to catch that the way I'm saying that. It's important, especially in people that work in HR, because we know in HR, a lot of what we have to do is sell our HR department to senior management. A lot of what you do in an HR department is getting buy-in from upper management. Those of you who work in HR departments know exactly what I'm talking about. I want to be careful about the way we say this, because it will help us get that buy-in. What we're talking about is what we can do and what we should do to strengthen our workforce by making it more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive. And always include that. This is just a little tip for my fellow HR professionals out there. Our goal is to strengthen our workforce. We want to have a better, stronger, more robust, more able workforce. The way we do that is by making our workforce more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. But if you go to senior management and say, I've got an idea to make our workforce more diverse or more equitable, you might get some acceptance, maybe. But if you go to senior management and say, I got an idea to make our workforce stronger, and here's how we're going to do it, you're going to get much better buy-in. That's intentional wording. It's something that we in HR need to be aware of, because we're constantly selling ourselves. Okay? Some of you who work in other fields probably have a similar situation. You're constantly selling your ideas or your programs or whatever it is to senior management. Well, here's one way to do it. We're going to strengthen our workforce by making it more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. Okay? So what can we do? What should we do to accomplish that goal? And I've got basically 5 little steps. We'll go through them one at a time, but 5 little steps to strengthen our workforce, especially as it relates to hiring. Now, we're not talking about overall programs, just focusing in on the staffing function, on getting our workforce together. 5 steps. Number 1, we're going to expand our pool. Talk about that in a minute. Number 2, we're going to post carefully. Number 3, we're going to insulate information. And I'll talk about what I mean by that in a minute. It's a very important function for HR departments. We're going to prepare our team, and we're going to be ready to accommodate. And I will tell you, if we can check yes next to each one of these steps, then we're going to do a good job, not just of avoiding discrimination. We already knew that, but not just doing the negative, but now the positive. What can we do? What should we do to improve our diversity? These 5 steps will help us when it comes to staffing to reach that goal. Not, like I said, not just avoid discrimination. That's the easy part, but actually affirmatively improve our diversity, our inclusion, our equity. These are the 5 steps. So what's step number 1? Expand your pool. Some of you in HR have probably run up against this. The most important thing we can do, especially here in our part of the state, we're in a smaller, more tight-knit community. One of the most important things we can do is to expand our pool of applicants by expanding our recruiting. Okay, some of you, and I invite your comments, but we need to think, we in Southeast Wisconsin need to think broader when it comes to geography in order to have an expanded pool for our job applicants. Okay, we at Lakeland, we intentionally advertise our positions in diversity-based job postings, right? With the Chronicle of Higher Education and the Higher Ed Jobs websites. There are specific diversity-based job posting boards. Take advantage of them, right? You know, I have heard it attributed to Einstein. I don't know if he said it or not, but somebody one time said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, that applies to recruiting too, right? You want to diversify your workforce, but you only advertise in one location, one way to get applicants, you're not going to accomplish it. If you want to expand your pool, you've got to think ahead to how are we going to advertise? Where are we going to advertise? Are there diversity-based sites that we can use? We intentionally partner with a firm called Behind the Scenes Staffing in Milwaukee because they have a broader, more diverse pool of potential applicants. These are steps that any employer can do. Again, I invite you to post in the comments what you do to find a more diverse pool for your applicants. A quick Google search will give you a dozen of these job sites.
Katie Pruitt is now joining.
Oh, well, hi, Katie. But that's the first step. We're never going to diversify our workforce if we don't diversify our applicant pool, right? So step number 1, expand your pool. I am going to include in that, expand your pool beyond just workplace advertising or job postings, but also finding recent college graduates from other schools outside of this area. We know there are other schools with larger populations of more diverse students. Why don't we search there, post our jobs there, contact the employment offices there? In our HR department here, we are intentionally working to expand our pool, and I invite other employers to do the same. Because like I said, you're never going to diversify your workforce if you don't diversify your applicant pool. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, post your position very carefully. Some of you have probably run into this, and part of this goes back to what you can't do. Some of you have probably consulted with the EEOC guidelines for how to post positions in ways that don't trigger or don't limit who your applicants are, right? The classic example is using the word server rather than the word waiter when you're posting a server position. Most of us now, again, kind of back to the what you can't do, most of us pretty well understand why we wouldn't post something with a gender specific term in it. We try to be inclusive. The EEOC expects it, and we know we don't want to run afoul of the EEOC. But we still have limiting language in our job postings. And this is the key here, this step number 3. When you write your job specifications, think inclusively, right? We tend to think exclusively when we write job specifications. And we say, you're going to have a minimum of this college degree or a minimum of this whatever it is. Now, some positions require licensure and all, and you have to meet minimum requirements. But in general, our job specifications, when we post a position, should be written inclusively, right? Not just educational degrees, but experience in lieu of degrees, right? That's one way to broaden our pool and diversify our applicants. We tend to post, and I'm talking not just about Lakeland, but in general in HR departments, we tend to post exclusively. Our postings, when somebody reads our posting, they should read it as, what can I do to fit that? Not, oh my gosh, they've already excluded me, right? More inclusive language, more inclusive qualifications, more inclusive job specifications when it comes to education and so forth will again broaden our pool. Okay, I invite you again in the comments, give us some examples, something that we can discuss for ways to post carefully and broaden the applicant pool. Get us a more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive workforce. Okay, so expand the pool, post your positions carefully. Step number 3, insulate the information. And again, I'm talking now primarily to HR people. This is a crucial HR function, okay? Information comes into HR departments. Sometimes it's related to hiring decisions. Sometimes it's related to something completely different. But one of the major roles, one of the most important functions of the HR department is to insulate that information. When it comes in, it stays here, and other decision makers don't have that information, okay? Employers frequently remove identifying information from resumes and applications. We're working toward that at Lakeland now. We don't do it completely yet. I have to confess, we're still working on it, but we're trying to improve our process so that information that might reveal age or might reveal ethnicity or might reveal something about someone's background that's irrelevant to the job is being pulled out before the decision makers get it, okay? This is especially important when it comes to criminal records, right? Many of you, if you work in HR, you know the risks that you have with CCAP. I mean, we like it, everybody loves it, but it's really, really a dangerous tool because in the wrong hands, that information can be a problem, both because it eliminates some people and keeps us from being diverse, and second, because it does cross into that area where you can't do things, right? You can end up with a discrimination lawsuit by accident. You backed yourself into it because of CCAP. Please tell your employees, tell the hiring team or the interviewing team for open positions, that's off limits, right? If there is criminal record information that comes in through a background check, HR has to insulate that information. Nobody should have it but HR. It is a crucial function for us to hold that information away from decision makers so that they won't be influenced by it. They can make a decision on the merits and not be influenced by something that's off limits. Okay. I can tell you from working with clients over the years, this is a hard sell sometimes, right? Telling a client that he or she or whoever's doing the interviewing shouldn't know information about an applicant. That's a hard sell, but it's a really important sell. It really is going to protect you from discrimination lawsuits, but just as importantly as avoiding what you can't do, it's also going to give you a better chance to diversify your workforce, okay? We emphasize this every day in our department. Information comes in, maybe it's medical information about an employee, maybe it's financial information, maybe it's information about an applicant, criminal record, whatever it is. Insulate that. Don't let it get out to those decision makers where it will influence them unfairly. Okay. I probably preach this to our team at least once or twice a week and preach it to our hiring teams and our interview teams just about every time it comes up, just because it's so important. Okay. We're not going to diversify if we randomly or preemptively eliminate a large swath of our applicants, when really we shouldn't, if we hold that information carefully and insulate it from the decision makers. We know we're going to get a better pool. Okay, so expand the pool, post carefully, insulate the information. Step 4, prepare your team. Everybody on the staffing team, anybody who's doing interviews, anybody who's reviewing applications, anybody who's checking references, any of the things that you do as staffing should be trained in what they're doing. Okay, and this is another thing that I emphasize with clients all the time. Just because somebody's good at a job doesn't mean they're necessarily good at interviewing or hiring other people for that job. Those are two different skills, right? We talk about this in HR classes and employment law. We talk about this in our department. I've been preaching this to clients for years. Train your interviewers. Prepare your interviewers. I like to see all of our interview questions in advance, right? Now, some people, don't like that. They want a more free-flowing conversational interview, but it is crucial that we treat every applicant consistently, and the way to do that is to have written interview questions. I'll give you a little example of this, a little sidelight into a story from practicing law. I had a client, lady that came to me because she was up for a promotion within her employer. And this promotion would have expanded her territory. She had a little sales territory. And if she got the promotion, it would have included all the way up, like from Manitowoc all the way up to the UP. And so as a result, if she got the promotion, it would have involved overnight travel, which she had not had before. Well, she interviews with the team that's making the decision for the promotion, and they ask her about the overnight travel. It turns out they didn't ask any of the men that question. Now, hopefully, I can't see your faces, but hopefully red flags are going up. They were inconsistent in the questions based on an old, outdated stereotype about female workers should be home with the family and it's okay if men travel, but women shouldn't. It's an old, outdated stereotype, but they were kind of subconsciously falling prey to that by asking her a set of questions they weren't asking the men. Okay, we found out about it. We filed a nice little lawsuit against them. We got a very healthy settlement out of that. I'm back to telling you what not to do, but it's an important point. Treat all of these applicants consistently. Treat everybody ask everybody only job-related questions and the same questions all the time. You're protecting yourself from discrimination, and by doing that in advance and preparing your team in advance, you're also going to get a better, more diverse better, more diverse filtering process for your candidates. Okay, that lady got the settlement the lady I was telling you about got the settlement. It's one of my all-time favorite settlements because we negotiated back and forth and finally got the dollar amount exactly where we wanted it, and we were about ready to agree. And at the last minute, she says, "Oh, and they have to throw in the company car." She had a company car, and she said, "I'll agree to everything if you throw in the company car." And the company bought it. They ended up settling not only for dollars in her pocket, but they also gave her the title to the company car. It's one of my favorite settlements, but it shows you the risk involved in not being consistent with these interviews. And it shows you the reason we should be consistent. She shouldn't have been disqualified just based on her gender. That's an old, outdated stereotype. That is not the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we want in our workforce. So prepare your team, right? Don't think only of the risks of interviewing. Think of the opportunities to find new ways to do jobs, to find new people who might be qualified that we can bring in and diversify our workforce. Okay, preparing your team is crucial. So that's 4, right? We got expand the pool, post carefully, insulate the information, and prepare your team. The last one is kind of a practical piece of advice, but it's an important practical piece of advice. And that is be ready to accommodate under the Americans with Disabilities Act during your staffing functions, during your interviewing and everything else. This is a common mistake that employers make. Most employers have heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Most people know sort of some of what the requirements are. What they don't always realize is the requirements of the ADA actually begin long before employment, right? The requirements of the ADA include job postings, initial interviews, any testing that you do, pre-employment testing, interview processes, etc. So be ready to accommodate the diversity in your workforce, especially as it relates to disabilities, in order to meet the legal requirements and to be ready to demonstrate your commitment to diversity, demonstrate your commitment as an employer to having a more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive workforce. I see this again in my practice back when I was representing clients. Not being prepared for what might come in, right? That means maybe your applications, you should always have more than one way to apply for a job, right? Some people might not be able, based on some disability, might not be able to apply online. So accept paper applications, but don't mandate paper applications because some people might not be able to do that. Always have options. Have interviewing options. We've all been forced into learning about Zoom interviews or Teams interviews. Use that technology now. The pandemic, there might be some good that comes out of it after all, if we've all learned how to take advantage of that technology in order to accommodate potential disabilities when it comes to our staffing functions, when it comes to recruiting and hiring workers. Anything along that line, any way to expand the pool and be ready to accommodate the applicants that we might receive, are going to go a long way to that goal of strengthening our workforce by being more diverse. Okay, so those 5 things, 5 simple little steps. None of this is complicated. None of this is legally, complex or anything. Expand your pool, post your positions carefully, insulate the information so that decision makers aren't tainted by information that you really don't want them to know. Prepare your team, including the people doing the interviews, and be consistent in that. And then be ready to accommodate if the need arises way back during the application process, not just on day 1 of employment, but your obligations under the ADA begin even before that. Okay, if you can accomplish these 5 steps, you'll do 2 things. You will, in fact, avoid discrimination. Each of those steps will help protect you from what you can't do. But more importantly, you will accomplish what you want to do. It's not just what you can't do, it's what you can and should do. It will help you diversify and strengthen your workforce. 5 simple steps to reach that goal. And if we can do that, I feel like it's time well spent. I feel like we're doing what we should be doing, not just avoiding the negative, but positively doing what we should be doing to improve our workforces. That's about all I had to say. I'd be delighted to answer questions. I realized that didn't take nearly as long as I thought it would. That kind of is embarrassing, to be honest. Maybe I talk too fast. My students occasionally do warn me that I talk too fast, but I'd be very happy to address any questions anybody has about either what we do at Lakeland or in general, what we can do as employers to strengthen our workforce by making it more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive.
Well,
So I
thank
throw
you.
that out there.
Yeah, first of all, let me say thank you, Jim. I appreciate the information. It was extremely insightful. Lots of great info, and we did have 2 questions come in the chat. The first one is just a thank you for the wonderful presentation. And will the presentation deck be available? Will you have that available to the attendees?
Sure. I'll send it to you, Chris, and you can do it, or people can email, however you want it. I'll be happy to send it.
Perfect. Yeah, so all of that will go out. The recording will go out later as well.
Let me just say one little thing about that as far as the slides. The little pictures in the slides, My wife helped me find those. So if you like them, I'll take credit. But if you don't like them, you know who to blame. Okay. No, I'm joking. She did help me last night find those little pictures. They're not nothing much to it, but maybe hopefully it helps us visualize some of the points we're making.
Perfect. Thank you. The one other question that came in the chat. Allison asked if we aren't to be asking in order to avoid possible discrimination issues, how are we supposed to collect information for reporting to organizations that ask for it? And in particular, Allison says she is a member of a nonprofit organization and some funders ask about this information.
Okay. Actually, interesting, Allison, because I was the executive director of an autism-based charity, and we ran into some of those same questions, not so much with employees, but with how we were spending donor dollars and so forth. So I have a little bit of experience with what you're talking about. There are ways to collect that information anonymously after a decision has been made. At Lakeland, that's what we do. We have an anonymous survey that goes out that then provides us demographic information about our applicants and our employees. Their employees are required to fill it out within, I think it's 30 days of the first day of work. So there are ways to do that anonymously. Also, and you can collect the information. Here's my advice though, and this ties to what we were talking about. If you need to collect the information and it's not anonymous, that's still okay, as long as it's insulated from decision makers. This is a good example of that. If somebody has asked, for instance, for an accommodation or talked about it during an initial interview or something like that, or maybe it's on a resume, if you insulate that information in the HR department and then decision makers, people, the interview team, whoever it is, don't know about it, then you're safe from the discrimination, and yet you're meeting your obligation to accommodate. It's another example of that isolating or insulating the information. So yes, there are ways to do it. You can do it anonymously. If you can't do it anonymously, you can still collect the information. Just don't let it go to any decision makers where it might look like it's influencing the ultimate decision. Okay.
Perfect. Stephanie DeGrand, I see that you have raised your hand. What's your question?
Hi there. Yes. I turned my video on, so hopefully you guys can see me. Thank you, Jim. That was great info. I just wanted your opinion about something that we have in place in our interviewing process. So our HR department recently started, without really getting insight from our DEI area, specialist area, they have a process called Spark Hire, which is like a video interview software that we put in place during the pandemic to try to help with the whole interview process and make it, more streamlined. Now, the concerns from, our DEI perspective are now the hiring managers are seeing the candidates making assumptions, or, there's unconscious bias coming into play and things like that. Do you think that, I guess from your opinion, would it be better to not have a tool like that at all? Is there a better way to use it that can try to protect us from some of those discrimination issues?
I don't advise not using the tool, right? Because in a face-to-face interview, some things are obvious, some things are just obvious. So it's not that we have to interview completely blind. What we have to do though is, and what I try to do is make initial decisions about who to interview with as much information scrubbed as possible. So we know at least our first step is as clean as possible.
Sure.
Then when somebody is interviewing, and I hope you do this, I hope your HR team does this, nobody should be interviewed by one person, okay? That is an invitation for the unconscious or subconscious biases to override a good decision. So always have an interview team, always train that team, always be consistent. Is it still possible you're going to get some of those unconscious biases? Sure. I can't guarantee you're not. But if you have more than one person involved and you've trained your team and you're consistent with all the applicants, you're taking every step you can to minimize it. And the more you do that and the more people see the strength of it, the better off you're going to be.
Sure. Thank you.
Perfect. We do have another question in the chat. Stephanie asks, for those that are not protected, in particular LGBTQ plus, not being listed on the Wisconsin list, how do we close the loophole for discrimination?
Well, Stephanie, that's a great question. And I should point out that what I put up there is just an excerpt from the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act. It goes on and on for page after page after page. You know how lawyers are. Actually, sexual orientation is considered in Wisconsin a subset of sex-based discrimination. So Wisconsin was actually, some people don't know this, we were actually the very first state to protect sexual orientation from discrimination in our statutes. Okay, actually, technically, the District of Columbia beat us to it, but DC is not really a state, so we still get to say we're the first state. So although it's not specifically listed in the part of the statute I showed you, there is a subsection of it where sexual orientation is included in sex-based discrimination. So Wisconsin was kind of a leader in that. I believe the number is 38 or 39 states that have specific statutes that address that, but we were one of the first. Now, as you may know, last summer, I think it was last June or maybe late May, the Supreme Court expanded the definition of sex-based discrimination in the federal statutes to include discrimination based on orientation. So now we have, by statute in Wisconsin and by Supreme Court opinion nationally, those protections. They don't necessarily show up in the text, but that's in the subsections and in the interpretation that is still included. It was a very interesting opinion, and I won't bore you with it because, you know, when a lawyer says interesting, you always take that with a grain of salt. Nobody really knows. But if you're interested in reading it, send me an email and I'll let you know. You can find the site. It was a very interesting reinterpretation of EEOC guidelines and the federal statute to broaden that protection to include those groups. Very, very well put together opinion.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. All right. Do we have any more questions? They can be in the chat or feel free to turn your mic on and share that way as well.
I see, Christopher, a good number of Lakeland people in there. Y'all know my door is always open. You know, stop by anytime. If somebody has a question about this, if you, and I'm speaking strictly to my Lakeland people now, if you see something or hear something or suspect something or see something that raises a red flag, please let us know. I am, and we as a department are, and I can speak for some of the senior leadership to whom I've spoken, we are committed as an institution to protecting against that. So maybe you don't want to put it in a chat, maybe you don't want to, you know, talk about it here, but my door is always open. If there's something that somebody sees that raises a little red flag and maybe you have a question about it, I would much rather address it now than later when it becomes more of a problem. So please give me a call. That is something that we in our department, and I can speak for some of the senior leadership, we take that very seriously.
Perfect. Thank you again so much, Jim, for sharing your insights and information into this topic. Obviously, it's very important to understand the legal aspects behind, you know, this particular challenge, you know, and this topic itself across the different industries and across, you know, our culture itself. So, with that being said, if no one else has any additional questions, I will. We will be able to say goodbye. Yes, Jim.
Well, I think Jamie raised her hand. I don't know if that was on purpose or not.
Yep, it was. Sure. Kind of riffing off the question. So at our institution, I am working to kind of identify, we have a BIPOC caucus after our training sessions and such. And I'm just struggling to understand the best way. You know, obviously people can self-identify, don't have to. And I just wonder, what, you know, when you talk about decision making and such, I am, you know, in key leadership. So like, how do I understand how people self-identify in any of the ways, so I can kind of create or invite people to these ERGs or to these caucuses without discriminating? Like,
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I'm going to answer it. Probably, I'm going to tell you not to have people identify, right? So, for instance, if you're inviting people to a caucus, invite everybody. Make it wide open. Don't target invitees because of their demographics. Now, that's probably not the answer you wanted, because you want to be sure you get a good, diverse field in these caucuses.
Yeah, but like when it's a caucus, if it's a BIPOC caucus, I don't want to invite the white people. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
that's the difference.
Well, I'm not sure that I don't know why you wouldn't at least make it open for. Because
this is a rationale in the DEI training I've found, is that you want to have safe spaces for these folks, right? And it was identified through trainings that some BIPOC people were having a hard time hearing what the rest of the training, and to have that safe space for people, I want to continually invite other BIPOC people. So like, yeah, we leave our trainings open to everybody, but there are going to be some employee resource groups and places where, like, now we have a new person of color who just joined the staff, or I may not know that they identify as, Pacific Islander. I don't want to leave them out, because then that's not inclusive if we have a specific BIPOC caucus. So I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, is what is the best way to get that information so I can invite the people in whatever it might be, because you're going to have these breakout groups where we need safe spaces for people to communicate and digest and talk.
Yeah, we've run into that a little bit here with some of the DEIB training that we've undergone. And I certainly understand the need for the safe spaces. I'm still a little bit gonna err on the side of making it broader. I think you can advertise that there will be safe spaces for people, safe spaces for people who share characteristics and feel more comfortable expressing themselves that way. But I don't know that I would single out and make specific invitations to it. I think it's a fine line. I understand what you're saying, and we want to. Sometimes our goal. Let me say this the right way. Sometimes we're not close enough to our goal to actually get there yet. We would love to not need safe spaces, but we're not there. So I understand the need to have it. I just still personally err on the side of making it broad, letting people know where the safe spaces are, letting them know that they won't be singled out or something like that. If they have opinions they want to express only with certain groups, they certainly can do so. But I would still I wouldn't be exclusive about it if you can avoid it. That's not a very good answer, because it is kind of a gray area question, but that's where I would come down.
So you're suggesting send out an invite to all, or send out a message to all staff, and those who identify as BIPOC can choose to attend should they wish. More that kind of thing, rather than a specific invite.
Yes, because if somebody identifies that way, for instance, you probably know this, but in areas where race is actually defined legally, for instance, in the EEOC guidelines, you can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of race. Part of that includes their associations, right? I happen to be married to a Latin American woman. I don't appear that way. There's nothing in my background or name or anything else that would indicate that. But if my employer found out about it and discriminated against me on the basis of my association with a Latin American, that's still just as illegal. So you can't always tell. You make your invitation broader. If there was a Latin American event here and I wanted to go because that's part of my family's culture through my wife, I shouldn't be excluded from that. I should be safe there too. So I think you make it broad, but then make it safe.
Thank you, James.
Sure.
All right, and we had a couple different comments in there in the chat as well, just on that topic. But a great question, great conversation.
Yeah, and that's an ongoing issue, and not just as it relates to race, but as to other demographic groups as well. So, yeah, give us a little time. We'll get an answer, but it's not quite there yet.
Perfect. All right. Additional questions? We do still have a couple minutes left in our time. All right, I'm going to then, if no one else has any questions right now, I'm just going to do a little plug for our next session. On the 19th of October, just under 2 weeks, we will be inviting Jason Ray, the president of Wisconsin's LGBT chamber, to join us to give a presentation on how to work with people who identify as LGBTQ+ within the workforce. So he is going to be talking specifically about how to work in that space within professional settings. So by all means, if you have not signed up for that, you are more than welcome to. And with that being said, I will once again thank you, Jim, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we will talk to you later.